Imagine waking up to find that the foundation of your financial reality has shifted overnight, not because a president gave a speech, not because a central bank raised interest rates by 25 basis points, but because quietly, without press conferences or breaking news banners, the rules of the global energy trade were rewritten behind closed doors. While the mainstream media is distracted by elections, culture wars, and surface-level diplomacy, undercurrents exist to expose the silent moves, the kind made in private rooms with no cameras, where power doesn't argue, it simply decides. This week, signals emerged of an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Russia that does something once considered unthinkable, conducting energy transactions outside the US dollar framework. No dramatic announcement. No official declaration of war on the dollar. Just a subtle shift in settlement mechanisms, pricing references, and bilateral clearing arrangements. And yet, this may be one of the most consequential financial developments of the decade. This isn't entertainment. This is a strategic deep dive for those who seek to protect their wealth and understand the machinery of power. To understand why this matters, we need to strip away the noise. This story is not about oil prices going up or down next month. It's not about whether the dollar collapses tomorrow. And it's definitely not about conspiracy. This is about systemic risk, leverage, and a tectonic shift in how value moves through the global economy. Think of the global financial system as a massive interlinked machine. Energy is its fuel. Currency is its wiring. And for over half a century, the wiring has run through one conduit, the US dollar. What happens when the largest oil producer and one of the largest energy exporters begin experimenting with alternative wiring? To answer that, we need to go far back, the rule of analogy, setting the frame. Before we go further, let's simplify something complex. The petrodollar system is often described in abstract terms, but here's a clearer analogy. Imagine the global economy as a city where every house must pay rent in one specific currency. That currency isn't just convenient, it's mandatory. If you want heat, electricity, or fuel, you must first acquire that currency. Now imagine the landlord starts accepting other forms of payment from select tenants. That doesn't collapse the city overnight, but it changes who has power, who needs permission, and who suddenly has options. That's what this moment represents. Layer 2, the hidden history. How we got here. To understand why Saudi Arabia is selling oil outside the dollar is seismic, we need to revisit 1971. That was the year the United States quietly ended the Bretton Woods system, severing the dollar's direct link to gold. Overnight, the dollar became a fiat currency backed not by metal but by trust. That trust needed reinforcement. So in the mid-1970s, Washington struck one of the most important and least publicly discussed agreements in modern history, the Petrodollar Pact. The deal was simple. Saudi Arabia would price oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, the US would provide military protection, weapons, and political backing. Soon, OPEC followed. If the world needed oil, it needed dollars. If it needed dollars, it needed access to US financial systems. This created structural demand for the dollar, artificial but immensely powerful. It allowed the United States to run chronic trade deficits without facing the usual consequences. It allowed unlimited leverage, what is essentially a credit card with no spending limit, paid for by global demand for dollar liquidity. For decades, this system worked, until it didn't. 2008. The fracture. The 2008 financial crisis was the first visible crack. Banks collapsed. Derivatives, financial weapons of mass destruction, nearly took down the system. And central banks responded not with restraint, but with unprecedented monetary expansion. Quantitative easing wasn't money printing in the old sense. It was balance sheet alchemy. But here's the key point. The world noticed. Countries holding trillions in U.S. Treasury debt realized something uncomfortable. Their savings were being diluted to stabilize someone else's system. Trust didn't vanish overnight, but it became conditional. The slow build up to this week. Fast forward to the 2010s and 2020s. Sanctions became a routine geopolitical weapon. SWIFT, the global financial messaging system, was no longer neutral. Think of SWIFT like the postal service of money. It doesn't move funds itself, but without it, transactions become slow, expensive, and risky, like trying to run a business without mail, internet, or phones. When Russia was partially cut off from SWIFT, a line was crossed. The message was clear. Access to the dollar system was no longer guaranteed. It was conditional on political alignment. That forced a strategic rethink, not just in Moscow, but in Beijing, in Riyadh, in Brasilia, and now, quietly, in energy markets themselves. Layer 1. The event, what happened this week. This week, multiple indicators pointed to a shift in how Saudi-Russian energy transactions are being structured. Not a press release, not a treaty, but changes in settlement currencies, bilateral clearing arrangements, pricing references outside traditional dollar benchmarks. In practical terms, this suggests oil and energy trades being conducted in local currencies or alternative units of account, bypassing the dollar as an intermediary. This isn't the death of the dollar headline you'll see on social media. It's far more dangerous than that because it's quiet, incremental, and reversible until it isn't. This is arbitrage at the geopolitical level, exploiting cracks in the system without openly challenging it. And it signals something deeper. Strategic pause number 1, inner circle mention. At moments like this, information asymmetry becomes everything. Those inside the exclusive inner circle don't wait for headlines. They track flows, incentives, and second-order effects. Because by the time a trend is obvious, the opportunity or the danger has already passed. What this really means, systemic interpretation. Saudi Arabia isn't abandoning the US. Russia isn't suddenly dominant, and the dollar isn't collapsing tomorrow. What's happening is more subtle and more profound. The global system is moving from monopoly to multipolarity. Energy is the test case. Once energy can be priced, settled, and stored without the dollar, everything else becomes negotiable. Commodities, trade finance, sovereign debt, even reserve status itself. This is how systems change, not with explosions, but with workarounds. And in part 2, we're going to map the chessboard. Who gains leverage, who loses control, and why this shift may affect your savings, your cost of living, and your financial freedom more than any election ever could. Because the most dangerous changes are the ones that feel invisible right up until they aren't. Layer 3, the geopolitical chessboard. To understand who wins and who loses, we need to stop thinking in terms of nations and start thinking in terms of leverage. Geopolitics isn't chess played with flags. It's poker played with liquidity, energy flows, and settlement systems. On this board, Saudi Arabia is not rebelling, it is hedging. For decades, Riyadh's power came from being the cornerstone of the petrodollar system. But that same system also locked it into a single patron, a single security architecture, and a single financial orbit. What Saudi Arabia wants now is optionality. By settling some energy trades outside the dollar, it sends 3 messages, each to a different audience. To Washington, we still cooperate, but we are no longer dependent. To Beijing, your currency has utility beyond borders. To Moscow, energy gives us mutual leverage against financial isolation. This is not ideological alignment. It is strategic arbitrage. Russia, on the other hand, has fewer illusions. Cut off from large portions of the Western financial system, Moscow has been forced into experimentation. Local currency settlements, energy for goods swaps, and alternative clearing systems aren't preferences. They're survival mechanisms. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Whilst these mechanisms exist, they don't disappear when the crisis ends. They remain as parallel infrastructure, who loses quietly. The immediate loser is not the United States as a country. It is something far more abstract and far more important: dollar exclusivity. Reserve currencies don't die from rejection, they die from irrelevance. Every barrel of oil not settled in dollars is a barrel that doesn't require U.S. treasuries as reserves. Yes, U.S. banks as intermediaries, U.S. compliance as permission. This reduces structural demand for dollars. Not enough to cause collapse, enough to change pricing power, and pricing power is everything. The rule of analogy: reserve currency risk. Think of the dollar like a luxury apartment building in the best neighborhood. As long as everyone wants to live there, rents can rise indefinitely, even if the plumbing is old and the wiring is risky. But once alternative neighborhoods become livable, even if their imperfect tenants start negotiating, that's what multipolar settlement does. It introduces choice, and choice destroys monopolies. Strategic pause number 2, Atlas Portfolio App. This is why tools like the Atlas Portfolio app exist, not to predict headlines, but to map exposure. When currencies, commodities, and capital flows begin decoupling, diversification stops being a luxury and becomes a survival skill. Layer 4, why this matters to you. Now we reach the most important question. Why should any of this matter to someone just trying to save money, buy groceries, or plan a future? Because macro shifts don't stay macro. They filter down. Here's how. Arn. Currency volatility. As energy trades fragment, exchange rates become less stable. That volatility shows up in imported goods, fuel prices, and inflation expectations. 2. Higher structural inflation. The petrodollar system exported inflation abroad. As that system weakens, more inflation stays domestic, especially in deficit-heavy economies. 3. Reduced policy control. Central banks lose precision when global demand for their currency becomes optional. That means more aggressive tools, larger interventions, and greater risk of policy error. 4. Freedom of movement. Financially, when systems fragment, governments increase oversight. Capital controls don't arrive with sirens. They arrive disguised as temporary safeguards. This isn't about panic. It's about awareness. Strategic pause number 3, Plan B, playbook. Those who navigate periods like this don't rely on a single system. They prepare Plan B playbooks, frameworks for liquidity, mobility, and resilience when assumptions fail. Not because collapse is guaranteed, but because dependence is dangerous. The 3 future scenarios. Now, let's look forward, not predictions, pathways. Scenario 1, the managed transition, the most optimistic path. The dollar remains dominant, but not exclusive. Energy trades diversify gradually. Institutions adapt. Volatility increases but stays contained. This is slow erosion, not collapse. Painful for those over-leveraged, survivable for those positioned correctly. Scenario 2, the systemic shock. A trigger event, geopolitical, financial, or technological, accelerates fragmentation. Liquidity dries up. Trust breaks faster than institutions can adapt. Capital freezes where it stands. This is where leverage becomes lethal. Not chaos everywhere, but chaos in the wrong places. Scenario 3, the status quo illusion. Nothing changes until it does. Markets normalize the shift. Media ignores it. Complacency deepens. And then one day what was unthinkable becomes policy overnight. History favors this scenario more than we like to admit. The agreement between Saudi Arabia and Russia isn't a headline. It's a signal. A quiet confirmation that the world is no longer organized around a single axis of trust. Energy is just the beginning. Because when the fuel of civilization changes how it's priced, settled, and controlled, the consequences reach far beyond markets. They reach into sovereignty, into freedom, into the future of money itself. And remember, the undercurrents are only invisible to those who don't know where to look.